There's a lot of hype on MVP, or minimum viable product, or the Lean Startup, a book written by Eric Ries. But for a lot of people, you can validate a business, but getting it to that next stage is the tough part. That's why we're talking with the co-founder and chief of business, Brian Helfman of Startup Island, on episode 85 of the 1004 show. In today's episode, we go over exactly that, how to go from that prototype into actually building it into a continually viable business. And then also what Brian learned from a previous business that didn't work and how he got through some of those challenges and still copes with that today. 1004 Nation, I hope you're ready, because let's hop on a plane and head to the Startup Island with Brian Helfman. Where was the first place you ever traveled to?
The first place that I remember, I mean, my family and we took a bunch of ski trips early on. So the first real travel experience that I remember was probably skiing in Colorado. My dad had me skiing before I could walk. There's a picture of me on skis as like a baby. We went in like upstate New York, Vermont. But then the first time out of the country, another family vacation to the Bahamas when I was like 12. But I didn't travel on my own until college, when I took a 3-week study abroad immersion my junior year of college with the business school. We explored all over Central and Eastern Europe, which was my first real significant exposure to travel with peers and traveling on my own.
Where did you go to school?
University of Michigan.
University of Michigan, big blue nation.
You know it.
Who's
Yeah.
who's like the greatest Michigan football player of all time?
I mean, Tom Brady is probably the greatest football player of all time.
At Michigan,
So
though?
no, it's best athlete who came through Michigan, best athlete when he was at Michigan.
I
Um,
mean, Desmond Howard? Didn't he go there?
yeah, yeah. Charles Woodson got maybe might have to give it to a Heisman winner. Um, yeah, probably it's got to be a football player, so got to give it to one of those guys.
There you go. Did you ever go back to college, like to just to visit or reminisce?
It's funny. I spend so much time on college campuses promoting Startup Island and talking to our travelers, building events for entrepreneurial minded students. But I actually haven't been back to the University of Michigan in about 4 years. I definitely miss it, and I want to get back there, hopefully this fall for a football game. But with all the travel we do, mainly throughout the Northeast, it's tough to find the time to get out to Michigan.
What is
But
start?
hopefully this year.
Yeah, hopefully. I went to West Virginia University. I haven't been back there many years, probably 5 or 6 years. And every time I go back, I graduated maybe 10 years ago. It's completely changed. I mean, it's a wild place, and so it's always fun to do that. What is Startup Island?
Startup Island is a series of travel experiences for entrepreneurial minded college students and young professionals. So we always felt that there was a gap in, or I should, let me rephrase that. We always felt that as an aspiring entrepreneur, it was difficult to build up the courage, the confidence, the perceived knowledge and resources to execute on your business idea. And there are a lot of resources out there that, especially over the last 5 years, that have come out to help this population. But I think there's a gap in having people who are in the same boat to really communicate with and help and support you on your journey. So at the same time, I always felt that through some of my travel experiences throughout college and after college, I was really able to learn so much about myself and connect in more meaningful ways with the people I was traveling with. So we thought that by combining a travel experience with a population of aspiring entrepreneurs, we could facilitate more meaningful connections through a really through an experience that was focused specifically on personal and professional development.
One thing that I think is oftentimes missed is, and we talk about this a lot actually on the show, is maybe it's mentorship or not, right? Maybe it's advice or not. But people who are giving advice that have never done that certain thing, you have to take it with a grain of salt, right? They might have been a very successful entrepreneur 30 years ago, but if you're building an online business or something that's heavily relying on online things, which a lot of businesses are now, it's very difficult to really understand the advice from that person because they've never actually done it. And it sounds actually, I knew I should have reached out to you. This is why I'm super excited, because it's like I preach this all the time. It's like, you aren't credible in this field. You shouldn't be talking about this. And so it's like people are like, oh, just do this thing. Or I always say, like, you can follow the checklist to hire or fire someone, but there's no emotional side in there. And that's really painful for anyone who's ever had to do the bad side of that. And so how do you kind of put that in place so that the right people are with you at, when the experiences happen?
Yeah, so one thing that I'm a true believer in, kind of taking your question from another perspective, is I'm personally a very slow and careful decision maker. When I make decisions, whether it's, where I'm having lunch today, or, how to roll out a new feature in a product I'm building, I try to gather as much knowledge as possible before making that decision. And that's also how I look at advice. When seeking advice or when imparting advice on others, and this is how we look at the coaching that's conducted on our trips, it's not about looking for someone who's going to tell you what to do. Advice just provides more knowledge. When I ask someone's opinion, or when I give an opinion to one of the students I'm coaching, it's just another perspective and another piece of knowledge to help that person ultimately make their own decision. So on our trips, we have a very flat mentorship structure. We believe that there's something that everyone can learn and teach someone else in the group, because everyone has their own experience, their own unique path. And like you said, there's no one size fits all. There's no, even the most successful entrepreneur might not be able to give you the best advice because he hasn't been in your shoes, or she hasn't, she's not on the front line seeing what you're seeing and talking to your users day to day. So advice is just a way of gathering more knowledge to hopefully make your decision making process easier.
Love that. Very well said. So how do you find advice then personally to grow your business, or where do you do your research so that you can stay on top of it, and then be able to help others as well?
Yeah, so again, Startup Island is not just a means by which I've been able to create this experience to help other aspiring entrepreneurs. It's also a vehicle through which I learn a ton. Every trip we have, I learn so much from our students, from our other coaches. So that's number one. And through the Startup Island community, it's a community such that it's not like you go on this trip and then you never speak to these people again. You could imagine after a week in Costa Rica, these people are people who are going to be in your corner, people who become genuine friends. So through the Startup Island network, I've been able to leverage a lot of our students and fellow coaches for advice and help when I need it. So it goes both ways. And then, of course, there are blogs and books and certain entrepreneurs that I look to for advice. And again, it's not like there's no one whose advice I take blindly. It's just people and publishers that I look to for new trends and more resources and knowledge to help me in whatever I'm doing.
Would you say that 3 week trip to Central and Eastern Europe really helped gel or make this decision to start Startup Island?
So that 3 week trip in Europe definitely indirectly helped me come up with the concepts that I've ultimately built into both my first business and Startup Island. But that first meaningful travel experience was, I think, 6 years before I started Startup Island. So it was more the culmination and combination of all those different experiences that led me to where I am today. But yeah, that Europe trip definitely stands out as the first time that I really felt the power of a unique travel experience as a means of personal and professional growth.
What was the first business that you started?
The first business I started was called Tabs. It was a venue search engine predicated on curated content rather than crowdsourcing reviews. So we wanted to sort of flip the Yelp model on its head and wrote all of our own content in the form of insider notes and searchable keywords to make the search process faster and easier for our customers. So we built that in New York a few years before starting Startup Island. Did pretty well, but ultimately chalk it up to a learning experience. Without going too into it, inner team issues, having some part of our development team outsourced really led to our the ultimate reality that we couldn't scale this thing the way that we originally thought we could. So like everyone says, the team is everything, which was the biggest thing that I learned through that experience.
What is you said it did pretty well. What do you mean by pretty well?
So we grew. We launched in New York City we launched our beta in like September 2014. And we built a pretty strong user base in New York City, about 20,000 users. We started forging venue partnerships with bars and restaurants throughout the city. We raised some angel funding and had a team of 6 full-time people plus about 12 interns who helped us gather content. And we had professional photographers running around the city who, at the time, Yelp and Google were not doing a very effective job at capturing the essence of especially bars and restaurants in the city. Now they've gotten much better at this, but at the time we were, the product was getting great feedback. So that all happened over the course of about a year. Our peak was around June 2015.
How did you make money on it?
So the plan was to roll out a feature called chalkboards. You know, the chalkboard that sits outside a restaurant or a bar that says like the daily specials. So ultimately we wanted to build a feature that allowed venues themselves to update their content on the chalkboard in real time. So, and then we would push their specials and their events to targeted users in their geo-targeted radius. So that was the plan. We didn't get to that point. We had these venue partnerships set up for events, for general advertising through our newsletter and other platforms, but because of those inner team issues, we just couldn't give ourselves enough runway to build out that feature that ultimately we thought could be a real game changer.
That those inner team issues, were they like co-founder issues, or just you guys were hiring the wrong people?
Probably a little of both. So our CTO was incredible, but he was based in Virginia. So not being able to work in the same physical location was tough. It was nice to have him in the same time zone, but we were based in New York. He was in Virginia. We saw each other in person maybe once a month. But not being able to go through feature rollouts together was a little difficult. And what made matters probably, what made things just move a little slower was he was managing a team of developers who were mostly in India. So he was our tech guy. He managed the entire tech side of the business, but it was just tough for him to communicate with the developers in India while we were relaying the things that we wanted through him essentially as a middleman. So it was kind of like, a situation that we got ourselves into because we thought we would just build a minimum viable product and then maybe find a development team in New York to scale the product. But once we were working with these guys in India full time, and I think once you build a product, it's really hard for someone else to come in and build off that existing code base. So once we started looking for developers in New York, we realized it was going to take a full reboot of the product to do that. So we kind of got into a situation where it was like a lose-lose situation where we either stick with our guys in India or totally restart with a team in New York, which ultimately was a crippling dilemma that we were
I've never seen one developer or one company take over someone else's code and not start from the beginning. Basically, it just doesn't seem to happen. Are you over this business yet? You seem a little still like.
Good question. So I would say I don't think about it every day, and I guess over it, what does that really mean? To me, when you first asked the question, like there are things that I do think about every day, tragedies and loss that I'm definitely not over. In terms of that business, which, was a significant loss, I would say I'm more over it than some of those other personal things. But as you obviously can tell, I haven't fully I don't know if as founders and entrepreneurs we get over that failure until the next success. And even though Startup Island is getting towards that point where, we're successful in a lot of ways, in terms of the people we've impacted, and the traction that we've been able to achieve over the last few years. I don't know. At this point, I think I either need some to really give that first business a better postmortem and come to terms with the fact that, obviously it didn't work out, or maybe it's just the, entrepreneur in me that's, perpetually afraid of failure, who is still just waiting for that big success to get over the first failure.
As someone who has started a lot and closed a lot myself, it is very hard. And I think that I don't know if holding grudges is the right word, or if just thinking and reflecting back, but the more you talk about it and to try and mend relationships, if those are issues or anything like that, the sooner you do those things, the much better you'll feel about yourself, at least in my case. And I know that I closed a business last year, and maybe it was last year, maybe it was the year before, but I remember I was I'm not crying, I'm not getting emotional. It's okay. I did get emotional that day, and I wasn't gonna say this. So I'm writing handwritten cards to all the investors, basically saying, hey, I basically lost 90% of your money, but here's the little bit that we have left. But I'm sorry, basically. And I remember writing these. It was really early in the morning too. It was like 6 a.m. It was really emotional, and they were fine with it, but I was the one that had a really had time with it. And when people say life goes on, it really does. So I mean, my advice to you, and I don't know the full story, is try and mend those relationships if they're not there. Try and just think about ways that you can improve upon it in the future. So that you don't have these, challenges again. So what did you learn from that you don't have the same mistakes with Startup Island?
Yeah. So first off, I do feel very fortunate to have been able to mend some of those relationships over the last couple of years. My co-founder is still one of my best friends. We did go through like a 6 month period where we didn't really talk much, but now we talk all the time, and he's doing really well. I'm doing really well. So we're able to look back and laugh at some of our hardships with a little more of a light heart. And my CTO, that former CTO, I actually spoke to 2 nights ago, and we were on the phone for like an hour just catching up. It was great. Um, but in terms of what I learned from that experience that's helped with Startup Island, I think the biggest thing is I'm non-technical. And with that first business, I was building a mobile app. I was building a very tech intensive product that required a lot of expertise in a field that I didn't know intimately myself. And I've become a firm believer that it's really hard to manage someone else when you haven't done the job that you're managing them in. So with Startup Island, it's much more of a combination of everything I'm passionate about and everything I'm good at and everything that I've always prided myself in doing. It's building experiences for myself and others, which I've literally been doing since I was a child. Um, and another thing is in terms of fundraising and building out enough time for yourself. In my second business, I knew I wanted to do something that wasn't as capital intensive. With Tabs, we were burning about $15,000 a month in that first year, which isn't a crazy amount for a tech product, but it can be debilitating when you need to raise that much money to extend your runway. Whereas with Startup Island, our very non-capital intensive product, we built all the tech ourselves because it's a very simple website, and our tech costs are essentially our $12.91 a month subscription to Wix. That's it. So being able to give yourself more runway and sort of buy yourself time without spending money on it. So just, accumulating time, I think is incredibly important, because if you can survive long enough, I truly believe that you'll figure out a way to become successful. It's when you raise too much money too fast and set benchmarks for yourself that you can't hit. That's when, tons of companies that I've been a part of and I've seen have failed because they try to grow too fast.
So when you're so you spend $13 a month or something like that through a Wix website, and I think a lot of people need to hear this, because a lot of people think they need more and more and more, not just money, but like more resources, more tech behind it. And I'm of the mind, and it sounds like you are too, that do build things with the least amount of things as possible, and ultimately, your tech is your IP when you're on these trips, right? And so as long as you can provide great events and great opportunities there, all you need is a good landing page and a place where people can bring in money. And so how did you get that mindset that, hey, I don't need to be spending a crap ton of money on something when all I need to do is build this thing once to be
Yeah.
a good resource for the people that are looking for it.
Yeah. Again, it's from that first failure, because when I built that first business, I thought I was doing all the right things. I read a ton of books on starting up, and this lean startup methodology that we're both touching on, I read before building that first business. So I tried to do everything by the book. I had a job until the business was able to support me. And, I didn't go out to raise too much money for the same reasons we're talking about. But it's, again, when you're not, when the money is going towards something that you're not entirely familiar with, like in my case, when the bulk of the money was going towards developmental costs. And again, I had a great relationship with my CTO who, we were very transparent with setting deadlines and timelines, but it's still really hard to and maybe this is just my nature as potentially someone who micromanages too much, but for me, it was really hard to not be fully invested and understand everything that was going on with where the bulk of the money was going. Um, so again, that's the biggest thing I learned was, and I learned it the hard way, um, through a lot of time and long hours and struggle that you need to really when you talk about the lean startup methodology, it's always anticipating that you'll need at least twice as much money and twice as much time as you set out for yourself. Um, so now, I've sort of adopted this mantra of just succeeding slow. You know, why fail fast when you could just stay alive and succeed slow?
I like that. Succeeding slow. I I agree with MVPs and lean startup methodologies. I think they're a good way to test ideas quickly. I think there's a very big challenge with that next step in getting to growth. And I think that is the very difficult thing. I think validating idea is something that you can figure out pretty quickly. Whether or not you even want to own a business is one metric that I think is something that a lot of people should look at. But getting it from, and it sounds like you're in some sort of MVP to growth stage with Startup Island now. How do you, or prototype to Startup Island stage, how do you take it to that next level and make sure that what you were able to do before, which worked really well, can grow and scale to a higher multiplier?
Yeah, great question. So we are in this place with Startup Island where we have proof of concept. This March will be um, we'll have 11 trips under our belts, about 150 travelers, and a lot of great reviews, great testimonials, and great experience. So the next step is really figuring out how to scale this thing and how to duplicate what we're doing beyond just myself and my co-founder. Because right now, the two of us are very involved in every facet of the business. So it's tough because you have to find that balance, especially in the business we're in that's so predicated on relationships, to find that balance between nurturing your clients and making sure that the intimacy of the program and the the power of the program, which oftentimes does come from us being a part of it, can be duplicated and ultimately we can remove ourselves from the process, which again, as someone who might have a tendency to micromanage too much, it's hard. And it's hard to automate something like a travel experience where, again, that personal human touch is so important. So I don't know if we figured that out yet. We definitely want to empower people from within our community to lead trips of their own one day. So, out of those 150 plus travelers who have been on one of our trips, it's a lot of people who really understand what we're trying to do and want to be part of the long-term vision. So empowering them to take leadership roles is going to be a big part of the process probably in the next few years. And also custom retreats. We're starting to do more retreats for corporations, other startups, individual student organizations, where we don't have to be part of the entire experience. We can sort of put together a program and handle all the back end logistics, but empower, the HR rep or the head of the organization to really take ownership over the event and make it their own. So that's one thing that we're experimenting with over the next year.
Did you learn anything in business school that actually helped you in the business side of it?
Definitely. So probably not as much as Michigan would have, tried to, at least going in, not as much as I had hoped. But the financial side of things, being able to just build a simple business plan and put together a pricing model and forecast revenue, a profit and loss statement, like those simple things, which granted I had to sort of relearn just by a few quick Google searches years later. They were easier to relearn because of my business school experience. Um, and I was a finance and marketing dual concentration. And my marketing classes, same thing, like definitely provided that base knowledge that has helped me probably build on that knowledge and retain information more over the last 6 or 7 years since college. Um, but for the most part, it's been my work and startup experience since college that has helped the most, for sure.
I find that for me, college was really good for the life experience, building up bar tabs, going to sporting events, stuff like that. I think you really
Yeah.
learn about a lot about your life, between the ages of 18 and 25, and college is obviously a big piece of that. Um, it, and I think for you, it's looking at it and saying, all right, it did give me a foundation, and that helped me get there. I think the alumni is important too. That's always good. So how do you get onto schools if schools are your customer, or the students at schools are your customers? How do you kind of start building those relationships with those people?
A lot of, again, just that personal touch is what we're all about. So we started marketing our first trip in October 2015 by emailing as many leaders at student organizations throughout the country as we could. And we happened to get some good feedback from a few students in the Boston area, and were able to really infiltrate schools like Northeastern, Babson, MIT. And through those initial, students who came on that first trip, um, one thing that I did learn in business school that, um, a simple idea that's probably helped me the most is the best form of marketing is just to create a great product. So we got those first 16 people on that first trip and just went into it thinking, let's give these 16 people the best week of their life. And through that trip and all the trips that we've done since then, once students from a particular school come on our trip, we tend to do pretty well with word of mouth marketing after the trip. Another thing that we've been focusing more on recently is faculty and administrative partnerships. So, especially once we have a few students from a particular school on our trip who speak highly of the program, we've been able to really leverage those relationships to form faculty partnerships where in some cases they've been willing to fund student trips and help us spread the word on a higher level. Um, and I think like you were getting at with how we sell to those people is very different from how we sell to students. And we never discount the education that the students who come on our trips get in college. We are about supplementing that education, not replacing that education. Um, and I think that's something that colleges are getting better at, is being more open to experiential and alternative education, because I think it's becoming more widely accepted that the traditional classroom, lecture test model just isn't effective.
Slowly, they're slowly doing
Slowly,
this.
yeah. And obviously some schools more so than others. I think there are a lot of great teachers and professors and administrators out there who are ahead of the curve, and then some who are stuck in their ways, just like any other industry.
Episode 85, we're talking with Brian Helfman of Startup Island. You guys can learn about them at joinstartupisland.com. Define success. You've used that word a lot. What does success mean to you? Define it.
So to me, success is a lifestyle that you can be proud of, and living day to day with, and really being able to tell your friends, family, peers, children, parents about your day and be really excited about your day to day. To me, it can be that simple. It's not a dollar amount. It's not about prestige or fame. It's about being really happy and proud with what you're doing on a day-to-day basis.
Love it.
So it's definitely different for everybody, but that's, I think, the core.
What is Brian Helfman the best in the world at?
Well, the short answer is probably nothing, but
It could be micromanaging, according to you.
um, I would say so. The thing that I have, again, always prided myself on most is creating memorable experiences. So, again, I don't know if I'm the best in the world. I'm probably definitely not, but I have always prided myself, even, in growing up, starting football tournaments, basketball tournaments in my middle school, and creating experiences, events, activities that bring people together and make people happy. That's, I think, what I'm best at, and something that I'm trying to continue developing, and something that Startup Island, of course, is that's what it's all about, and that's where I manifest that skill on a day-to-day basis.
To piggyback on that, how do you know that your product is an amazing product and that it doesn't suck?
Great question. So I think our customers are the only people who can truly speak to that. And if you look at our website, if you look at the testimonials, it's not the type of thing that people could fake, or, even if they just wanted to make us happy, the video testimonials, and not just, the stuff that we capture, the stuff that we hear on our trips, the conversations we have with our travelers, and the feedback we get from the students we coach on a regular basis, it's real. And seeing that is the only way that I think any entrepreneur can know if his product or service is achieving the goals that you're setting out to achieve. It's all about what your customers think. And we're very fortunate to have amazing customers and amazing students that we work with on a regular basis.
I don't think people promote themselves enough, and I think that's one of the reasons why they don't grow to the place that they want to. I just got finished writing a book, and it's called Anomaly: How to Finally Stand Out from the Crowd. And one of the pieces in there is about kind of testimonials and getting testimonials and getting social reviews from people, and then promoting that because that could be the differentiator. I don't know why I cannot speak today. It could be the decision maker wanting to know, maybe I'm going to change this. Maybe I'm going to, not be on the fence anymore. And if you get a quote from someone that says, "Hey, you've really helped me," it gets you that sell. It gets you that sale, and it's so important. And I do think it helps that, to answer that question, how do you know if you have a good product or not? Well, if your fans are raving about it, I mean, that's a really good thing. So as a nobody, or as someone who goes to a new city or is building a new product or a service, how do you start creating a relationship when you didn't have one really to start?
Yeah, so I think it's a combination of things, of just like anything else. For me, I have always really valued my friends, my family, my peers, the people who I grew up with, the people I went to school with. And I think treating others with kindness, with respect from an early age is the most important thing you do, because your reputation is something that you control to a certain extent, but if you do something to sacrifice that, it can, affect you in ways that aren't always noticeable. But if you always treat people with kindness and respect and dignity and the way that you want to be treated, it pays dividends in ways that you usually don't notice. But those people, when you're building something, when you're working on, putting your ideas out into the world, those are the people who, even if they can't vouch for your business, they can vouch for you. So that's number one. And then in terms of connecting with strategic partnerships and investors and co-founders, again, I mean, that golden rule still applies. Um, and also just putting yourself out there, of course, going to networking events, um, and leveraging the people in your network through LinkedIn, Facebook to really ask people for help and really ask people to make introductions for you that they're not thinking about. People aren't constantly sitting there like, oh, how can I help Brian? You need to ask. But when you ask, most people I found are more than happy to help. It's just a matter of taking a small step out of your comfort zone and making that ask.
Yeah, people don't wake up thinking about you.
Yeah. Well,
This,
most people probably.
I, how many people do you think wake up thinking about you?
Um, Maybe my mom and my girlfriend,
Okay, well that's good.
and probably not every day, but
Sure.
they're probably the only two.
Do you have a favorite business book?
Lean Startup, of course, is definitely up there. Not necessarily a business book, but 10% Happier by Dan Harris is one of my all-time favorites. It's more about mindfulness and meditation, um, but a book that has helped me a lot in business. And I see behind you, you have Shoe Dog by Phil Knight, which I hate to say I haven't read yet, but my co-founder raves about it, and it's high on my list of books that I'm going to read
It's
next.
about a 350-page book, I'd say. I'm about 100 pages into it,
Oh, okay.
and it's just there to remind me to finish it. But it is really interesting. So it is written, I think, in like the 60s.
Hmm.
Or maybe not written in the 60s, but he tells the stories about like the 60s, and I
Yeah.
think it ends. It's that each chapter is basically a year, and he tells you the stories about that, and it's really interesting because he's like sending mail to people, waiting for things to come back, like contracts and stuff, and people complain about not getting an email response, and this guy's like having to wait weeks to send stuff to Japan and back and forth, and oh, it's interesting. So, what's the price point for someone to attend a startup island?
So we have our week-long programs in Costa Rica, and then we have weekend trips in upstate New York and Western Pennsylvania. So the trips in Costa Rica, the spring break program, for example, is 22.89 for the week, all inclusive. So we book flights, we handle accommodations, food, drink, everything. And some of our weekend trips, our price is low as $325 for an all-inclusive weekend, depending on where we're going, who it's for, and stuff like that.
Very interesting. Do people pay that all up front or after the trip or?
So the Costa Rica trips are usually done in installments. For example, this year I'll just take you under the hood with our spring break process. We required a $650 deposit up front, and then either the remaining balance by a set date, or we empower our students to either set up payment plans where they spread out the balance over the course of 6 months or so. And in some cases, we have helped students set up GoFundMe pages to raise money to be able to afford the trips.
Very cool. When they go on the trips, what are they learning?
Well, where do I begin?
And this is
So,
what you're the best in the world at. So, I mean, I
yeah,
expect an amazing answer.
I guess so. So when our students come on our trips, we call the experience a personal and professional development accelerator. The professional part of that is group workshops and one-on-one office hours with established startup founders and coaches who are there to really provide a individualized approach to coaching these aspiring entrepreneurs. Because again, you could sit in a classroom or go to a general assembly class, or learn from a Gary Vaynerchuk or a Tim Ferriss, but they tend to impart knowledge in this broad one size fits all approach. It's very hard to get a customized coaching session with someone like that. So the coaches that we bring on our trips are there to really form meaningful relationships with our travelers, which usually lead to organic mentor-mentee relationships after the trip is over. So our students come on the trip for the professional development that comes from those workshops, from those what we call island office hours, and those mentorship relationships that last, again, long after the trip is over. And the personal side of it is done through the power of travel. Again, I think there's an element of any travel experience, but especially when you travel with a group of ambitious, entrepreneurial-minded peers, there's a level of connection that occurs that's unrivaled anywhere else. And we facilitate that through our own workshops, through morning yoga and meditation, cultural exchange, activities, but just by getting out of one's comfort zone and really immersing in a new culture, I think you're naturally becoming more open to new experiences and meeting new people, which again fosters this heightened and accelerated personal development.
What's something about you most people don't know about?
So I am a certified yoga and ski instructor. The yoga part, people in my life now probably know more about than the ski instructor part. But I was a ski instructor in Colorado for a full winter about 5 years ago. Yeah, it's first thing that comes to mind.
And you learned how to ski before you could walk.
Exactly.
Which is pretty cool.
Yeah.
What's something that a lot of people ask you, but I did not?
Ooh, well, you asked a lot of good questions. I mean, from a non-business standpoint, I get a lot of asks for restaurant recommendations, bar recommendations because of my previous life in that space.
So then what's your favorite bar or restaurant in New York City?
Right now, White Oak Tavern, my neighborhood bar and restaurant, a block down the street. Place that's, I think, rare in today's New York, where I walk in and like the bartenders and the managers know my name. And so that's nice. That's, yeah, great food, great drinks, great whiskey selection. So that's sort of my go-to spot for everything.
Knowing that 10% Happy is one of your favorite books. Did I say that right? 10% Happy?
10% Happier.
Happier, okay. 10% Happier is, and it's a book by Brian Harris. Is that what you said?
Dan Harris.
I'm so off on this. Dan Harris.
Okay,
good. So knowing that 10% Happier by Dan Harris is one of your favorite books, how do you be more mindful and in that moment?
Great question. So yoga and meditation every morning. Again, I got my teacher certification about a year ago, and since then I have really incorporated more yoga and meditation into my day-to-day life. So it's pretty much the only thing other than brushing my teeth that I do every day, and making my bed. So I do about a half hour every morning that really gets me focused and ready for the day ahead. And through that practice, I've learned just sort of mental tricks to squash stress, anger, resentment, when those feelings come up. And it's really done through accepting those feelings and noting them rather than pushing them away and denying that they exist. So that's a topic I could talk about for hours, but that's in a nutshell how I try to do it.